Enots Engineering, I'm Alan. In today's video I'll be repairing an Asong power feed. It's an A235 which powers the milling machine table. I'll be replacing the reset switch and cleaning the motor armature to remove some of the carbon particles left by the brushes. So let's go into the workshop and see how we do it. I had a problem with the reset switch. It broke and stayed in the off position where normally the contact is in the on position, so then I lost the use of the power feed. So in this video we take this apart. I show how I repaired the switch, or replaced the switch, because I repaired it once. It worked for a couple of days and then packed up again. So I replaced the switch, and also I took the brushes out the motor and cleaned the armature on the motor because there was a lot of carbon build up. To remove the power feed, first thing I would do is take the cover off underneath, which covers the gear. There's a cap head on this side and a cap head on the back here. I'll just unscrew those. Two cap heads off. Then the cover should come off, and it's just a simple cover to prevent you getting anything caught in the gear. Now to remove the power feed, there's a bolt this side and a bolt at the back. So you undo the two bolts and then this should slide off as a complete unit. Now you can see this is the gear that drives the table. The next thing to do is take the cover off. If you look on the back, there are 4 cap heads in the corners. If you take those out, there's a spring washer on each one. This unit is spring loaded, so I'm doing them diagonally. Now as I undo this, see the seam here come undone. That's because there's as I said, there's a spring inside. You need to prise away the label a bit to get this off. Then you have the unit nearly separated. On the power feed, the rapid switch is this white wire, and on the end of that is a socket. As you can see there's a socket. The socket pulls up and out, and then you can separate the casting from the other half. Now this is the part with all the electrics in it. The wires are still connected. Obviously I've not got it switched on. This spring is the one that pushed the two parts away. That goes on the end here. This is the lever for forwards and backwards. Obviously the spring would keep tension on that. Here's the switch I replaced. What I want to look at is the motor. You can see that I'm just undoing the 2 cap heads on the top here. I also need to remove this screw here on the side which holds a circuit board. This top will come off. And the circuit board's held in on this side. The board slots into a groove in the casting, and this is just a piece of insulation that goes behind to stop the electric side touching the case. Take the armature out. What I want to do is clean up this where the brushes touch. I'll get some very fine emery and just clean that. That's the armature now. I've cleaned it, got the carbon off it. Look here, there's a brush holder on each side, it's just a plastic cap. There's one brush. Just checking down, there's a little copper washer at the bottom. And the rotor goes back in, there's a bearing on the end. That should go straight back through. There's a washer and a wavy washer on the top here, and then the bracket. Two cap heads. I'll just put the brush back in this one. What I want to check is whether there's any short between the brush and the casing, so I'll get my meter. So fit the brush in the other side. What I'm doing is test again by putting one side to the case of the motor, the other side onto the brush. If it shorts out, it should go to 0. I'm just touching the brass brush holder inside. It's not shorting out. So now put the cap back in on this one. So on the top of the brush there's a cap. I've just put a small amount of super glue on there and glued the brush spring to the top. That makes it easier to put the brush in. Spring goes down, screwdriver, that's the brush in, that's the motor reassembled. Let's make sure it will move freely. Here's a new switch that I fitted on this side. This switch is the reset switch, which went faulty. It should normally be a closed switch, but this spring had bent, leaving it as an open switch and stopping the power feed from working. So I removed the rivets and opened it up to see whether I could repair it, and this is how I did it. This is the switch, and as you can see, if I press the end in, it doesn't do anything, it's just solid. I know what's happened, it's broke again like it did before. The spring is not good enough. I actually took this apart, drilled out the rivets, and that's why I made some new rivets, reassembled it again, and it still lasted about 3 presses. So I thought, right, I need to get a new one of these. Looked on the internet, I can't find anything like that. This part on this side is the bracket that holds the switch. The switch just goes, the red part goes through the centre, and there was 3 of these clips and they just clip onto the switch. So I decided, okay, I'll buy an ordinary on-off switch button. Looking on the internet, the standard size thread is 12mm. This thread on here is 10mm, which means I'd have to drill the hole bigger in the unit to accept the switch. So I thought, well, what type of switch could I fit? And then I found this micro switch, which is a standard switch. You can wire this so it's on permanently when you switch it, or momentary on and off. So then the problem was, how do I hold that in the machine, because there's no way of using this type of thread to hold it. What I did was cut off these arms that are on there, and that gives me plastic plate with the thread on and the hole in. What I will do now is make a piece of sheet metal that goes on the back to hold that in the correct position. It wants to be held so that the button is in the centre, and make a button that goes through to operate the switch. What I'm using to make the plate for the switch is this piece of aluminium. It was a back plate for a number plate for the vehicle registration. This is the reflective yellow that we have in the UK. And what I want to do is make a bracket that will fit so it will hold that switch in the right position. There's the fold that I've made. I've just tapped that over in a vise, and I've made sure that it's just a little wider than the plastic. Now I've got some 3mm pop rivets, and I've just drilled a 1mm hole through the plate. Just hold the plate in position, mark it on the back, centre punch the mark, and then drill that out to 3mm. I've just filed some off the top of the rivets so they're not protruding too much. These are 2 holes for the marker switch, so we'll try the switch. Just put the switch in, and that looks, this part here looks as if it lines up okay. If I press this rod in, so what I can do now is cut some of this away at the bottom. I might just cut that straight across. Just fit the screws through. There's the plunger, that works. I will need to cut this to the right length because obviously it's further out than it was before. The next job is to put the nuts on the back and then cut the bolts to the right length. Okay, there's the switch. What I've done is I've put another piece of aluminium there to lift the switch up so that the plunger is in the centre. So that's ready for wiring. I've cut the corners off, and I've made it so that the terminals are above, so I can easily solder the wires on. And all I need to do now is just cut these bolts off. If the bolts cut down, there's the top view with the original pin in, and the switch operates. So all I've got to do now is find out which 2 of these to put the wire on. Here, there's the new fitted switch. I've soldered the wires on because I hadn't got any spade terminals. So this 2 wires go down to this one wire to this one, and I found out that the switch needs to be wired so that it's permanently on. So when you press the red reset button, it actually switches it off, because if it's permanently off, it won't work. I found out I'd wired it wrong. I'd wired it originally to this one, which gave you an off, and when you press the reset button it contacted to reset, but obviously it works the other way around. It's always on. When you press the reset button it switches the power off, and that prevents this circuit board shorting out on the casing. Make sure it's in the slot with the circuit board, and then we can put the screw back that holds this bracket, holds the circuit board in position. we should be able to test that. Switch the power on, switch it on. See the lights come on to say it's working, see that there? I'll switch it off again. Now it won't work properly because the spring's not there, but when I select, turn the resistor down, when I select forward or backwards, you see the motor's working. So that works okay. Turn the power off, switch it off at the wall. So we know this works okay now. The reset button works okay. Now I've reversed it, so I can put the cover back on and test the motor. In the bottom of the cover is the spring locating, and the other half goes into the gear at the bottom, which goes to this gear on the side, which turns the main gear on the end of the table. The only thing you have to remember is to connect this switch, which is a fast feed, that wire and socket on the end goes onto these two pins. It's easy to use some pliers to get that back on. And then as you lower this down, make sure that the front panel slides in this groove. Now that springiness in there is the spring pushing back. So all we need to do now is put the 4 cap heads back in from the other side that hold it all together. Knock this cap head off in this corner and then go diagonally so the spring try it again before I bolt it back onto the table. Switch the power back on, select forward, let reverse. Switch the power off. Now what I need to do is put this back on the 2 bolts. So that is resting on the gears and the 2 bolts. With the spanner, tighten the bolts up. Just nip it because you might need to adjust it. Just use the hand lever. Make sure it's in neutral. You can hear that's a bit, so slacken this bolt off, just lift it up a bit, there we go, bit of backlash but not much, and there's no noise coming from it, so it says that the gears are not grating onto each other. So now I can tighten this up a bit more. Try again. Yeah, it's still quiet. Now I've bolted it back on, I'll try it out. That works okay. I think it'll take a few days for the brushes to wear back in. I've been sort of had them out. At least it's working now. All that I need to do now is put the steel guard back on underneath and it's finished. Oh well, that's it for today. Hope that was useful. Hope you enjoyed it. Look after yourself and we'll see you next time on Enots Engineering.